This is just a quick look at what has essentially evolved into a no-rules worm bin. Now, it's a 220 litre Dalek style compost bin, and that's how it started off life, as a general compost bin. The base of the bin sits off the ground on a few bricks to allow for moisture drainage. From the very top of this bin to the level of the bedding that you can see there now, that was full with windfall apples, which our neighbour gives us whenever she collects them off the ground. Now, they're quite a sharp apple. I don't know what type of apple they are, but they're a very sharp apple. So the malic acid in the apple is very high. Now, these were literally dumped. She gave me 4 or 5 refuse sacks full of apples, and they were literally dumped straight into this bin, on top of whatever other stuff was in there. So you can just imagine how acidic that environment became, and how acidic the bedding became, and quite quickly. They've obviously rotted down quite a bit. It's about 2/3 full now. But just looking at the bin and looking at the worms, they are extremely healthy. They're very vigorous. They're nice and fat and juicy and active. And they don't seem to have been affected at all by what would be classed as overfeeding. The next thing just to notice is how wet the bedding is. Now, there's no way that you could class this as anything else except saturated, which it is. And that's, well, you can imagine the amount of moisture and liquid that the apples released. They weren't even broken up. You can see their hole there. This is probably around the bottom layer of the apples now. But they were, like I said, they were just literally dumped in. They were dumped in whole. I didn't even break them up. And it doesn't seem to have caused the worms one iota of a problem. So the bin is completely saturated, way too wet for what anybody would normally consider to be acceptable for a worm bin. And it has been overfed. It has also been fed an extremely high amount of acidic content all at once. And there's no evidence at all of protein poisoning, which is one of the big worries about overfeeding the bin. The other thing to say about this bin is I have never added any grit. Stuff like sand or eggshells have never been added to this bin. And if you've seen my previous videos, you know I save up the eggshells and grind them up in a coffee grinder, and I sprinkle every few months into some of the smaller bins. But no eggshells, ground up eggshells, have ever been added. There probably is whole eggshells in here because I have a 35 litre caddy, and once that's full, it literally just gets dumped exactly as it is into this bin. Now that means it includes onions, it includes pineapples, it includes tomatoes, it includes everything that would be very high in acidic content. And ground up eggshells have never been added to this bin. Nothing has ever been added to this bin except food. And I don't break up the food. As you can see, all the apples are completely whole, and whatever ends up in the caddy ends up getting dumped in this bin. And you can see it's absolutely heaving with worms. It's full of cocoons. The worms are very vigorous and very healthy, and the bin is absolutely saturated. So this is why I sort of jokingly refer to it as a no-rules worm bin. I didn't set this up as a worm bin, it was set up as a compost bin. But every one of the key rules for managing a worm bin doesn't apply to this bin. It's overfed, it's far too wet. There's no discrimination when it comes to in terms of what's put in there with acidic content and anything else. Nothing like grit is added, and nothing like eggshells is added to act as a pH buffer. All of the general advice that applies to managing a worm bin, absolutely none of that has ever applied to this bin, and you can see just how healthy it is there. I just wanted to put it out. I'm not saying don't use eggshells. I'm not saying don't add grit, especially to small bins. I'm definitely not suggesting that you overfeed your bin. And again, particularly small bins. But I think this is the key issue. I think as long as the bin is actually big enough and the surface area is big enough, the worms will manage absolutely fine. So you can throw in all your onions, throw in all your pineapple, throw in all your tomato scraps. You can, you don't need to add ground up eggshells. The bin can get too wet as long as it's able to actually drain, so it doesn't become like a bath, a muddy bath. If the bin is actually big enough, the worms will be absolutely fine, and it's thriving. There you go. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.